not sure if I believe that there is anything beyond what science can observe. I've never seen any proof of the paranormal that seems convincing. However, life seems to enjoy testing me every once in a while, and I do enjoy a good ghost tale even though I doubt they're real. When I was 9 years old, my parents divorced, and my mom and I moved out of the country, into a little house in a rural town. The house was built in the early 1800s, and it had many lives before it became a residence. It was small, but it had 2 stories and a basement. The interior was so poorly insulated that you could almost hold a conversation between the top floor and someone in the basement. Nothing out of the ordinary ever happened for the first 2 years we lived there. That all changed when I was 11. My half-brother moved in with us while he was looking for work in the nearby city. I always got back from school about 30 minutes before my mother, so it was nice to have someone at home when I got there. My brother and I were talking upstairs while we were waiting for our mom to get back home from work. While we were catching up on our day, we heard Mom's keys unlocking the door downstairs. Since I was often home alone, it was a habit to lock the door when I got in. We got up, starting to go downstairs to greet her, when the door slammed open and heard her say, "Oh shit." We heard her run across the living room, open the basement door, and head down the wooden stairs to the basement. We yelled after her, asking what's wrong, as we headed down the stairs and ran for the basement. The basement door was open, but the lights were off. We flipped on the basement lights and yelled down, "Mom?" Nobody responded. We went down the stairs and looked around. The basement was nearly empty, and you could get about halfway down the stairs and see the whole room wall to wall. After glancing around and seeing nobody, we continued down the stairs and looked around in disbelief. I remember the hair standing on the back of my neck. We closed and relocked the door to the house and ran upstairs. My brother, who was 20 years old at the time, was visibly shaken and terrified. We closed the door to my bedroom and blasted music as loud as we could until our mother got home. After that, I always felt uneasy in the house. It was made worse by the fact that the house made its fair share of creaks and rattling noises. I knew it was just the wood expanding and contracting, but it didn't make me feel any better. For a long time, things were pretty calm, but occasionally something would happen. Objects would go missing and end up in unexpected places. It was common for tools and flashlights to go missing and end up in the same speaker in the corner of the living room. For a while, if I needed a flashlight, I would just check behind the speaker instead of going to where I put it last. Sometimes you would find decorations on windowsills lined up on their sides. I've told myself that it had to be friends playing pranks, but to be honest, I'm not sure. I never could have gotten them to admit it, but I guess that doesn't mean much. For a while, the house became completely normal. I don't remember how many years passed, but I'm guessing I was about 15 when the house started acting up again. It was midday, and my mom and I were sitting in the kitchen, when all of a sudden we heard someone upstairs say, "Oh no!" immediately after there was a loud crash. We ran upstairs to see what happened. All of the plants on the shelf by my bedroom window were lying on the floor. I wish I could blame it on the wind, but unfortunately the window was closed. The voice could have been from my neighbor, but the timing was disconcerting. Then we started hearing loud bangs about every 2 months. Fortunately, they weren't accompanied by fallen objects. They were so loud, it sounded like a piece of furniture or a bowling ball being dropped on the floor, and occasionally they would rattle the windows. Often, we would be on separate floors and would meet each other in the stairs thinking that the other had fallen or knocked something over. It sounded like no matter where you were in the house, the sound would be on another floor. It could have been something structural, but we never noticed any telltale signs of sagging floors or cracked plaster. After a while, it just stopped. I was about 17 when I got my biggest scare from that house. My mother was away from the weekend and I had the house to myself. I was up until about 1 a.m. working on a project when I decided to go to bed. The house was still creepy to me, but I often closed my door, even though I was alone. I was laying there thinking about my project when I heard what sounded like scraping on my bedroom door. After looking for a while, I decided I must have started falling asleep, and the sound came from a dream. I started thinking about my project again and just laid down, and I heard the scrape again. I bolted right up and looked at the door just as the sound stopped. My heart started racing. This time, I was wide awake. I sat silently, trying to figure out if the sound actually came from inside the house. When the sound started again, it sounded like stone or metal scraping loudly and clearly from the top to the bottom of my door. My heart was in my throat. I grabbed a glass bottle and sat propped up in the corner of the room. I waited to hear a creak on the floor in the hallway. It was impossible to make it down the hall without the floorboards making a popping sound. If someone was there, I was going to hear them. I waited a while and then growled, "Who's there?" There's no response. I thought, fine, I'll outwait you. I wish I could have gathered enough courage to open the door, but I never did. I could see pre-dawn lights by the time I fell asleep. I didn't sleep long since I was propped up in the corner. When I woke up, it was about 7 in the morning. I opened the door and looked for scratches. The only scratches that looked like they could have matched the sound had been painted over. There was no freshly scraped paint on the door. I went downstairs and checked the deadbolts. Every door was locked. If the sound happened like that once or twice, I would have dismissed it as something that happened outside. The third time the scraping sound happened, it was so loud, clear, and slow that I had more than enough time to identify it. Later that day, I grabbed a rock and scraped it down the door. The sound was a dead match. I still have no good explanation as to what happened that night. I never experienced anything like that since I moved out when I was 18.